Hey everybody, welcome to the final video of this series, which we can title the Meltup series. As you all know, since middle of July, in fact a little bit earlier, I started my thesis on why I believe GME was going to melt up during the summer, and I laid down the groundwork in a very clear and coherent manner in which I posted what triggers a melt up. And we gave three conditions. First, price has to break above the monthly trigger. This is the first melt up for GameStop. We can see price breaking above the monthly trigger here. Then the second condition, the daily trigger crossing above the monthly trigger, we can see that happen here. And the third and final condition, the weekly trigger crossing above the monthly trigger, or price holding above the monthly trigger long enough for the weekly trigger to nearly cross, showing that bulls have taken control of the monthly trigger, which leads to that massive acceleration. That was the video I posted way back in July. And even before that, I had been talking about how, when the first big GameStop move happened over here, even back in May, I was already saying that I didn't think this is going to be the big run because the setup wasn't there. The weekly trigger was still well below the monthly trigger. And if you look at the purple shaded region right here, it's negative. So the monthly strength was negative coming into this month, which means that even though price broke above the monthly trigger in the month of May, because the monthly strength was negative, price was pulled right back down below it. Now we've seen the monthly strength turn flat and pinning kind of as price has been drifting sideways. This is exactly how melt-ups are formed. You can see here now, the weekly trigger is only a couple of pennies below the monthly trigger, so could cross in a week or two, as long as price stays above here. And that's essentially the final step of the melt up. So we had price breaking above the monthly trigger, we had the daily trigger crossing above the monthly trigger, and finally, GME is about to have the weekly trigger cross above the monthly trigger. All three steps needed to form a melt up. Now, I want to show you the key difference between a stock failing to melt up, even though it broke above the monthly trigger, and a stock succeeding in melting up. So if we look at Bed Bath & Beyond, and I know this might be a sore topic for many, so I don't mean it in any kind of way, I'm just showing an example. See, Bed Bath & Beyond had this incredible move way back in August 2022, where price did accelerate through the monthly trigger, but you could see monthly strength, the negative shaded region, was negative, and so price was brought back down in the month of August. Now, price was unable to remain above the monthly trigger for long enough for these lower time frame triggers like the daily and the weekly to cross above the monthly trigger, and therefore price was unable to melt up and instead went down. But if we look at AMC, back in 2021, in May and June, you could see the same pattern, price breaking above the monthly trigger. Here's when it kind of confirms the break. Over here, even though it poked above, strength was still negative, as you can see in the shaded purple region to the downside. Then you had that bullish daily trigger, monthly trigger crossover. And finally, you could see price pinning just above the monthly trigger for long enough for the weekly trigger to climb. Once it gets close enough, price starts to take off to the upside. You see, this is a classic 700% melt up, and it starts due to the exact same factors: price breaking above the monthly trigger, daily trigger crossing above the monthly trigger, and finally the weekly trigger crossing above the monthly trigger. And of course, we had the same thing back in 2020, 2021 for GME. Price breaking above the monthly trigger, daily trigger crossing above the monthly trigger, weekly trigger crossing above the monthly trigger. Now, you'll see this example everywhere. It's not just meme stocks. The reason why for meme stocks I call it a melt up is because the move just happens really strong and fast. But if you look at, for example, NVIDIA or any other stock that's been doing well over the past years, so you'll see the same pattern where price breaks above the monthly trigger, the daily trigger crosses above the monthly trigger, the weekly trigger crosses above the monthly trigger, and then the stock goes on a bull run. It doesn't necessarily melt up in such a short period of time. You could see really strong price action over the past year or so. So again, the reason why I call it a melt up is because for shorted stocks, we could see this type of move, well, maybe not all of it, but at least let's say this part of the move happen in such a short period of time. That's why I like the term melt up. It could be that GME is said to have more of just a gradual climb. I don't think that's likely. I think because of the short interest and because of the type of stock GameStop is, when it goes, it really goes. So I do believe it'll be a faster, more violent move. But again, and if you look at QQQ, for example, you see the exact same thing. So here you have price breaking above the monthly trigger. Actually, you had price attempt to break the monthly trigger here, but monthly strength was still negative. As you can see, the shaded purple region is to the downside. But then price bounces off the weekly trigger, breaks above the monthly trigger, daily trigger crosses above the monthly trigger, weekly trigger crosses above the monthly trigger, and there you have it, that same type of bull run. And if you look at Bitcoin or really any other stock in the market that had a nice upside move, as you can see price breaking above the monthly trigger here, daily trigger crossing above the monthly trigger, and then the weekly trigger crossing above the monthly trigger, and there's your strong upside move. So going back to current day GameStop, when we look at current price action, it looks like the Meltup setup is finally complete. So we have price broke above the monthly trigger, and instead of pulling back down and collapsing to the downside, quite the opposite, it was able to pin above the monthly trigger long enough for the weekly trigger to finally make its move and cross back above the monthly trigger. Now, here's where it crossed bearishly, and you can see the strong downside move that GameStop got. And then, of course, back here is when things cross bullishly, and you can see the strong upside move. So to me, it looks like GameStop is finally set to begin its melt up. For targets, simple Fibonacci tells us somewhere in around the 130 range could be an ideal target for the first stage of the melt up. Probably be a 3-wave up, and then a pullback, and then one more high. So Gavin, my partner, Gavin May, not sure if you guys know him, he is really good with Fibonacci, so those are the kind of targets that I'm looking at personally. And I'm really excited because it was a bit scary here, I'm not going to lie. This day was a little bit scary, and this day was a little bit scary because, of course, if price did end up breaking below the weekly trigger before the weekly trigger crossed above the monthly trigger, that's actually a bear plane setup, so very bearish. That's actually what we saw here, where price broke back down below the weekly trigger and was bearish for a long time. So did not want to see that happen. In fact, if I look really quickly for the video that I posted right here, let's just take a look for a second. Hey guys, so I wanted to just do a quick video on GameStop. I'll make it fast. Because I said I posted my channel about how in the past with GME bigs or 25, I think that's 30, and that's like a 25% position. It's more size bet just to be able to sell once we see like the first signs of bearish algo emergence. So just the build up, getting ready for the weekly trigger crossover. Price needed to do something like this. That's the only chance the weekly trigger was going to be able to climb this fast. So in last Sunday, we did have a pretty bearish trigger setup where price rejected the daily trigger and then sold back below the hourly trigger. So we were calling for a dip to either of these three areas, this 2144 support level or the monthly trigger or the weekly trigger. And then after that, we were calling for a move, back through the daily trigger to ignite the upside. And that's kind of what we saw this week. The one scare was that price dipped a little too far below 2064. So I'm not going to lie, guys. The moment before, I guess, the melt up kind of got confirmed was the first moment throughout this entire time where I was like, oh man, did they really just kill it? Literally the day before, I'm not ashamed to admit it. I mean, it's human emotion. It's what their algo is designed to do. But the day before, price bounced hard, and then the next day broke above the daily trigger is the first day throughout this entire time where I thought to myself, oh my goodness, they might actually kill this. So everything points to this next, if price actually does break above the daily trigger, everything points to a bigger rally than what we saw here. And that doesn't mean it's going to be faster. We could see just a slow, relentless climb over the next 6 months. But that's like what I would expect, the strongest move in GME, because now the trigger's monthly's bullish, the weekly is week bullish, very close to that crossover. Like for example, if GME moves up to like 27 in the week, the triggers will probably cross realistically, or one more week after that. This week, like if the volume just doesn't come in, probably expect to pull back to one of these areas. We should hold, bounce back, and then break the daily trigger. Otherwise, if we do break the daily trigger, I'm looking for an entry. So we got the dip. Again, it was a little bit steeper, but then price did bounce right back and moved to the daily trigger, and then moved right through the daily trigger. So all things considered, things are looking quite well here. Again, this was one of the scariest moments I've seen in a while, but thankfully, GameStop put out that news exactly when they had to, with the 8K paying off the debt. You guys know what I'm talking about. And then price took that bounce, broke right back through these three important triggers, weekly, hourly, and monthly, and was able to strongly accelerate to the daily trigger. You could see the rejection of the daily trigger, but then bulls caught it at the hourly trigger and pushed it back up. You could see one more rejection. And then what you'll notice is that the daily strength on the bottom, at first, when price first tried to attack the daily trigger, it was very negative. The second try, still very negative. But the third try, it was already receding and repairing, and you could see the hourly strength right here, this green shaded region, is bullish, positive, above the line, and it's starting to grow stronger and stronger. So things look really good here. Now, I guess just one final confirmation, what you like to see in these setups isn't just a runaway move right away. What we like to see is the hourly trigger right here cross above the daily trigger. Price usually pulls back. Let me just draw it out. So we usually see something like this. Where eventually, after this bullish crossover, there will be like a retest. And then what you'll see is the hourly trigger, like that. And then price breaks through the hourly trigger here, and that's what starts the big move. And I think we could get to like 2730 area really fast. So overall, just to ignite the melt up, I would technically want to see a bullish hourly trigger, daily trigger crossover, price pull back to the daily trigger, hourly trigger, break back above the hourly trigger, and start a really strong move to 30. And at that point, I would say, yeah, things are going. Earnings is going to be a caveat, but nonetheless, I do believe GameStop is now finally setting up its melt up. I do believe that we can see price move to triple digits faster than most people believe. Would love a nice earnings surprise to set the fuel, but I'm extremely bullish as I've ever been. Calling for this melt up for a while, so it's nice to see this setup finally get vindicated. Now, I really did think that the weekly trigger was going to cross the monthly trigger a lot earlier. I got a lot of flack for it because over here, when price was here, it looked like there's only a couple of weeks left. But then the market, you could see SPY took a really big turn for the worse right when GameStop was nearing that crossover. So there was a little bit of delay, but at the end of the day, the setup is alive and well. Things are nearly validated. Only a couple of cents away here, 20.84, 21.18. But now that price is back above the daily trigger, you could see the triggers are starting to turn really bullish here. Looks like everything is almost all set and ready for takeoff. So at this point, I'd say the melt up is all but confirmed, and I'm excited to see how this plays out.